This video is all about the contract you're going to sign with the station that you'll be on the air with. Basically, if you're an anchor, reporter, or both, you're more than likely going to have to sign one. Now, I got lucky because the boss who hired me in my first job was concentrating on getting his next job, so I got lucky. He never gave me a contract to sign, and the best part was the station already had me down as an hourly employee because I was a part-time employee, so they just made me a full-time hourly wage and never thought to question it. It was beautiful. So with that, let's talk about an actual contract. And some of this we have talked about before, but if you've been skipping around watching videos out of order, you might not have gotten this information yet. So it's in this video too. Plus, in this video, we're going to look at and break down a contract I did sign. And again, if you're a reporter, you're going to sign a 2-year contract. Again, I advise against signing a longer contract, a 3-year reporting contract, because you're going to want to move away and make more money after 2 years in that market. And remember, you're always going to make more money going to a higher market than you will by staying in your current market. That is, unless you're being promoted to a job that pays more. And usually that comes with a title change going from reporter to anchor reporter. One other scenario that can happen a little later in your career is that you're at a top-ranked station in probably a top 50 market somewhere that can actually afford to give you a raise if you re-sign with them. Now, if you're being signed as an anchor reporter, 3 years is standard, and that makes sense. The station is going to make on-air promos about you and put you on marketing material that could possibly include billboards. As a reporter, it was weird. One time, it did for me. And the whole reason for 3 years when there's anchoring involved is that they're investing a lot in broadcasting your image and from that want a return on investment. And that ROI translates to the commitment that you'll actually work at the station for 3 years. And that part, it actually makes sense. So, alright, enough with the review. Let's take a look at my contract. And the only thing I've blacked out is some identifying information. But all the rest of the stuff is the stuff you'll be interested in. The first thing to note is that my title was technically content producer because I was the first one-person band this station hired ever. So this is how they got me on the business books. But regardless of my title, I was a reporter, a one-person band, 5 days a week. And now the part named term describes how long the contract is. It'll name your start date, as it does here, and then say how long the contract goes for, which in this case is 104 consecutive weeks. Because obviously, 1 year is 52 weeks, multiply that by 2, and you get 104 weeks. And I know this seems weird, but this is the standard way that these contracts are written. Because in legal contracts, it's important to define terms as specifically as possible. And this contract definitely does that. It's just that they never read well because, after all, they're not written conversationally. Now the money, and you can clearly see that my salary is $62,000 a year. So also too, going on to moving expenses. And you see in this next paragraph that the company will reimburse me for up to $7,000 to move. And I know that's a big number. Keep in mind, at the time, I was told that this was standard procedure by the parent company. This wasn't a station decision or a newsroom decision. This is what the parent company decided to do. Plus, keep in mind, this contract came from a major market, not a small one, not even a medium one. There are some medium stations that are quite nice. So, the first few stations that you go to, believe me when I tell you, and when they tell you, they don't have that kind of money. In fact, most small stations don't have anything at all and will probably give you nothing. So, as I've said before, don't expect it. But again, know it is totally okay to ask for it. If you can get $2,500 or even $3,000 for moving, you're doing really, really well. They'll probably offer you much less than that, around $1,000 to $2,000. And here's the thing, I never even knew I got moving expenses anywhere near this amount until I saw this contract and read it. Something else too with moving is keep all of your receipts for your moving related expenses. Your company may ask you for those for the reimbursement. And also, please know that when I read that in my contract, I was thankful and grateful. It was unexpected, I won the lottery, and something like that has never happened again. I wanted to make sure to share that with you because one, it's in the contract. It really happened. But more importantly, two, it was in such stark contrast to what was done in Springfield and also other stations where lots of my other friends worked. So now, clothing allowance. In this particular contract, you'll see that I got $1,500 in the first year and the first year only. Now, this is rare in every way, and you're probably saying, Andrew, you told us in the negotiation video that we won't get a clothing allowance. And yeah, that's true. The reason why I got one here is because they wanted me doing a lot of food and nightlife reporting in addition to all the news reporting. So they were willing to help me pay for a wardrobe to fit the food and nighttime looks they were looking for. They weren't at all going to pay for news clothes, meaning shirts, ties, dresses, shoes, anything news-oriented. That was on me. In your situation, you're probably going into a 100% news job, and also why you'll be told no. But again, if you want to, you can always ask. The worst they can say is no. Now this next section you may not know anything about, and it's titled Pay or Play. And it's an odd title for what it covers. Basically it says that anytime during the contract, the station can change my role as long as they keep paying me the same. It also says that I can cash out any unused vacation if I haven't used it by the time the contract expires. It also says too that if I decline benefit programs like healthcare and retirement packages, that the station is not responsible for those areas of my life because after all, they offered me medical or a 401k or whatever, and I actively turned it down. Now, of course, few people turn down medical. Those who do are usually married to somebody and are on their spouse's plan because that plan happens to be better. And again, that's rare. I mean, you'll certainly know people who do that, but a majority of your newsroom is probably taking the medical. I certainly signed up for it, as well as the retirement plans to get the employer match. I also talk about saving money for retirement in a separate later video. So benefits. This brings up a generic benefits section where the station says that I am entitled to benefits and should the station be sold, that those benefits can change. This was coincidentally important because shortly after starting at the station, about 3 months later, it was bought out. In this case, it was a good buyout, and that too is rare. The employees at the station went so far as to say that our benefits got better, and a lot better than before. So again, that was a blessing. Exclusivity. This says specifically in writing that I work exclusively for the station and no other station in town. It also states that any other business that I want to get into or public activities that I want to be a part of must be approved by the station. This makes sure that I don't use my image to make money, and also that if I were to volunteer my time for a cause, that it wouldn't reflect poorly on the station. If it's a charity you want to be a part of, chances are your station will approve, because that's probably naturally going to look good for them as well. If it's in any way political or polarizing, they won't, ever. Now we get to first negotiation and first refusal. Basically, this says the station has the right to counter any new job offer I get in the last 6 months of my contract, and that the station has 10 days to make me that counteroffer that is either the same offer I'm getting from somewhere else or even better. Now, I've never seen this used before on the local news level, but you might meet some people whose stations made them a better offer, which locked them into staying. But again, that's gonna be rare, and here's why. This is a very specific clause with very specific triggers, and here they are. The biggest hurdle the station is going to run into is that it has to match the exact job description and then the money. So, for example, let's say that you're a reporter at your station and got a great offer to be an anchor reporter in some other market. Well, your station now has to come back and match that job title as well as the money behind the actual job. Your current station probably isn't going to be interested in making you an anchor reporter because if it was, they would have done so by now. And usually too, if somebody's looking to do that, grow in the business that way, and they're in a decent market, they've probably already gone to their news director asking for that opportunity, probably turned down, and probably with that, multiple times, and is why they were looking outside of that market. So I know that this clause might read somewhat scary, but again with that, I've never seen this actually used. This now brings us to ownership and use of name and likeness. This is the part of the contract where it says that they own your name, your voice, performance, and likeness, meaning you cannot use your image without their permission. And this is standard. Every station, everywhere has a clause in this contract. And this day and age, this clause has taken on new meaning because the clause, as you're looking at it, is the old school version of this clause. Back when it was thought and seen that TV was the biggest thing that you could broadcast on, where you could get the most attention, which of course nowadays is laughable. Of course, that mode is the internet. A question I usually get asked by students and beginning journalists is, all right, if I sign this clause, what about my Facebook page, my Instagram page, my YouTube channel, my TikTok, or whatever is sort of in vogue right now? And on some of these platforms, some people I've talked to have built large audiences. They like being able to talk to their audience about the things that they like listening to them for, whether this is yoga or fitness or health, or they're a collector of something, whether it be action figures or stuffed animals. These are all obviously very niche-based. Nowadays, you can actually still do those things just as long as your content would never reflect poorly on the station. Because if it did, the station would probably work quickly to let you go. And the mechanism they would have to do that is a clause that we will talk about later on in this video called a standards clause. And let's use me as an example here. So if Andrew were to ever do anything that would reflect poorly on the station, and word got out and the public found out about it somehow, the station would let me go to try to distance themselves from that controversy. The standards clause says that if I do anything that actually looked poorly on the station can immediately terminate the contract. And breaking the standards clause can almost be about anything. I've seen news people lose their jobs after having gotten into bar fights that were covered by the local newspaper. A friend of mine had his standards clause triggered when he spoke the truth against his parent company about making him, a meteorologist at the station, run what are called these code red warnings, these weather warnings that really, in effect, instead of warning people, just scared people because they were run too much or run at times where he, the meteorologist, is saying, there's no weather danger. Yeah, there's a storm, but there's no code red in terms of what you think about, what you imagine when you see the words code red flash up on the TV. But I tell you all of this to tell you, you're going to see standards clauses triggered with people that you know, and some of them really might be friends of yours. Which, hey, brings us to termination, which is a reminder that contracts, of course, come to an end. So up top, it says the obvious. If I were to die while under contract, so does the contract. All right, That's obvious. The part that you need to look at is paragraph C. Basically, this is what's called by some people as a standards clause or a moral clause. There are a couple of nicknames for what this is. Basically, it says that if you do anything that reflects poorly on the station in any way, that you can be let go for it. Some examples they include are disparagement of station sponsors, doing anything that becomes a public scandal, a public joke, or anything else labeled here that you could summarize as bad, including offending the community. Now, let's briefly talk about the rest of the contract. And most of it gets pretty boring at this point because, well, the money part's over. But there are things that you need to see. First, the non-compete clause. This says that you can't work in the market on air for at least 6 months after your contract expires should you leave that particular station. So, for example, here in Dallas, if I were to leave the station, I could not work at a competing station for 6 months. The hope in all of that for the station is that your star has dimmed a little bit over the course of those 6 months because you haven't been on air. And there actually can be some truth to that. It depends upon how long you've been in the market. Veterans are not affected by this. You're going to see in some of these markets where a station just decided that they don't want the veteran anymore. They were great, they have great viewers, they're in great contact with the viewers, they do all of the outside PR and like keynotes and emceeing and charity causes. And the station just still lets them go. Because again, there is a very business side of this business. So what you'll see is them just sort of disappear within their market for 6 months, and then basically 6 months and 1 day later, they pop up on a competing station. Because that competing station knows their value and says, hey, if you're not going to be on there over there, we're certainly going to take you and your goodwill and the audience of people who will watch you and come work for us. We'll pay you. But usually in these situations, you're probably moving out of market anyway, so it doesn't matter. And this next part is going to seem kind of funny. Because one, it's something I never thought of and I had never seen before in any kind of a contract and had no idea it would be in mine until I read my contract. This clause is called Non-Solicitation. Basically it says, Andrew, should you move on from the station, you can't tell anyone at this station about great new jobs at your new station for at least 18 months or a 1.5 years after you leave. It's basically an anti-poaching clause. But here's the thing. It's incredibly hard to prove. That's because there are many ways that one of my friends, one of your friends, could have heard about an opportunity at my new station. So, it's going to be really hard to prove that it was me who told somebody about this opportunity. There are so many other ways that person could have found out. There's no evidence. There's no way to prove how they actually did. I just bring all this up because, one, it was totally new to me, and of course, because it's sitting here in the contract that we're going through. And speaking of things in this contract, I want to point out something that's not in this contract, and it isn't because sometimes it's a separate document that not only you as on camera or on air talent to cover radio will sign, but typically too, it's my understanding that all employees who have a job to help get content on the air are asked to sign as well. And that will be a document that has a clause called payola. And what that simply says is that you as an employee of that particular station cannot put someone on TV, on radio, over the air, broadcast them in any way who is specifically paying you for the access to do that. Also, too, obviously, you can't put someone on TV, radio, broadcast in any way who is going to do some kind of barter or trade or favor for you. Obviously, this is because it would be a betrayal of the public trust and a huge, irresponsible use of the public airwaves. And that's the contract. So, as you begin to navigate yours or have more questions about mine, please feel free to reach out. But in this specific case, as you do that, keep two things in mind. One, I'm not a lawyer. And two, I'm certainly not your lawyer. And that's why it's always a good idea to have a lawyer specifically look at your contract. I always did. So with all that, I will see you in the next video.